The courtroom was packed. Every seat taken, the air thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lawyers shuffled papers, murmurs bounced between benches, and Diddy sat stone-faced, flanked by his high-powered legal team. His suit was sharp, his expression unreadable, but even from the gallery, you could see the slight twitch in his jaw, the way one hand gripped the armrest tighter than necessary. The media had called this just another celebrity trial, a clash of egos and NDAs. But something was off from the moment the bailiff announced the witness list for the day. There was a name no one had seen before, not in the leaks, not in the press briefings. And when she walked in, a woman in her 40s with calm posture but fire behind her eyes, the courtroom knew something was about to shift. She raised her hand to swear the oath, and the air changed. Not dramatically, not like in a movie. It was more subtle than that, a quiet ripple of awareness. She wasn't just another assistant or former friend brought in for filler. She held something heavy, and everyone in the room could feel it. The prosecutor didn't waste time. He stood with a confidence that felt earned, buttoned his jacket, and walked forward like a man who already knew the ending. "Can you state for the record the names of individuals who were present during the gathering in Los Angeles on June 13th, 2016? She nodded slowly. "Diddy, a few security people I didn't know by name, someone named James who handled logistics." She paused. "What about guests outside of Mr. Diddy's immediate circle?" he pressed. Her eyes flicked for a moment toward the defense table, then back. "R. Kelly was there." The words dropped like iron. A full second passed before the wave hit. It wasn't one gasp, it was a cascade. Like electricity running through a circuit. A woman in the back whispered, "What?" before covering her mouth. The stenographer's fingers halted mid-keystroke. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Diddy's attorneys leaned in, whispering rapidly, eyes darting, calculating the damage. "Order," the judge finally said, voice steady but low. It wasn't a reprimand. It was an acknowledgement of the seismic shift in the room. "Proceed with caution," he added, eyes on the prosecutor. The witness adjusted the microphone. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. "He arrived late, stayed maybe 30-40 minutes, escorted in and out quickly. I didn't speak to him, but I saw them talking. Diddy and R. Kelly, alone, in a room, door guarded." The words built like bricks. No speculation, just observation. But it was enough to suggest secrecy, to imply the walls were not just walls, but barriers to truth. The prosecutor let the silence settle, then asked, "Did anything change once Mr. Kelly arrived?" She nodded. Yes, the entire mood shifted. Mr. Diddy became more guarded. Certain parts of the house were suddenly restricted. Security doubled. I was told not to go upstairs. "Who told you?" "One of the guards, but he said it was from the top." "And who was the top in that situation?" She didn't blink. "Diddy The defense objected. Speculation, hearsay. But the objection was overruled. The judge allowed it based on direct knowledge. It was clear now the case wasn't just about alleged individual crimes. It was about culture, control, the people a man kept close, and the things done in their presence. "Did you hear anything from behind the doors?" the prosecutor asked. She hesitated. "No, but after Mr. Kelly left, Diddy made a phone call. I was walking past the hallway. I heard him say, 'Make sure everything's locked down. Nobody talks.'" The words landed like a punch, not because of what was said, but how. The courtroom wasn't reacting to evidence, it was reacting to energy, intention, tone. The prosecutor didn't follow up immediately, he let it breathe. "Did you feel unsafe that night?" She took a long breath. "Not at first, but by the end, yes, something was off. People were tense. The staff was on edge, like something had happened or was about to." For the first time, the defense didn't object. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they realized the fight wasn't with the witness. It was with perception, with the air itself, which now reeked of suspicion. Then came the shift. The prosecutor turned back. "Do you have anything to support your observations? Any documentation?" The witness nodded slowly. "Yes, I sent text messages to a colleague. She was also there." "Were those messages provided to the court?" "Yes." The screen flickered to life. A projected text appeared. "He's here. I can't believe it. RK just walked in, and now Diddy shutting everything down. Something's wrong." You could hear scribbles. "Jurors writing, not blinking." Another slide. "Get out of there if you can. This is the same weird feeling I had back in 2009. It's happening again." A chill ran through the courtroom. This wasn't isolated. It was recurring, patterned. The judge leaned forward, reading the slides. Diddy sat still, but his fingers now tapped the table. Not confidently, anxiously, rhythmically, like someone clinging to tempo in a song that was falling apart. "Did your colleague explain what happened in 2009? The prosecutor asked. "Not much, but we were working another party, another estate, another artist. Something went wrong. She quit the next day, told me she never wanted to work in that world again." The gallery was silent, but the air was vibrating. Because this wasn't just about one night anymore. It was about a lineage, a quiet tradition of power cloaked in fame and glitter. The prosecutor turned, his voice low. "Thank you, Ms. Hargrove. No further questions." The judge nodded, signaling the next witness. The gallery collectively inhaled. Something had begun, something irreversible. Diddy didn't move, didn't blink. But his grip on the chair tightened, as if the truth was a wave and he was the only one trying not to drown. The courtroom didn't breathe for a full 30 seconds after Ms. Hargrove stepped down. Her testimony hadn't just introduced a new character into the story. It had cracked the foundation of the entire narrative. Everyone felt it. The judge adjusted his robe, expression locked in careful neutrality, but his eyes betrayed the weight of what he'd just heard. The defense team huddled in a whispering storm, trying to spin angles, prepare damage control, anything. But the prosecution wasn't finished. "Your Honor," the lead attorney said, voice calm, "the state calls Mr. Warren to the stand." A man in his late 50s rose from the front row, tall, broad-shouldered, a hint of silver at the temples. His movements were steady, professional, but there was something else in the way he walked, a quiet heaviness, like a man who had carried knowledge too long. He was sworn in quickly and took the seat. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Please state your full name and your occupation at the time of June 13th, 2016. "Jackson Warren. I was a private security contractor." "Where were you assigned on the night in question?" "I was stationed at the Diddy estate in Los Angeles, part of the secondary perimeter team." "What were your instructions for the event?" "To monitor movement in and out of the North Wing, maintain presence near the pool area, and enforce a no-phone policy." "Was that standard for events of this nature?" "In part, but this one was different." "How so?" The man's eyes darkened slightly. "There were zones. Zones A and C were locked down. We were told to double guards at the north staircase. Anyone trying to move upstairs was to be stopped. Do you know why? We weren't told. Orders came down from Mr. Diddy, head of security, but it was clear those instructions came from above. Did you observe anything unusual during the evening? A pause. Yes. Twice I was asked to leave my post for something called special clearance movement. That's not protocol. We don't leave posts unless there's a direct physical threat. And what happened while you were gone? When I returned, I saw a young woman being led out through a side exit. She looked shaken, crying. Her makeup was smeared. She didn't speak, just walked out with someone I didn't recognize. The words slammed into the silence. The audience in the gallery shifted, not from restlessness but discomfort. The kind that comes when fiction starts sounding too much like truth. Did you report what you saw? I tried. Sent a message to my agency. 2 weeks later, my contract wasn't renewed. No explanation. Have you spoken about this before? No. I was scared. That kind of world doesn't like people asking questions. The defense stood to object, but the judge held up a hand. Overruled. Let him finish, Mr. Warren, the prosecutor continued. You've worked security for high-level clients before? Yes. Politicians, CEOs, entertainers, royalty. Have you ever had to lock your door at night after a gig? The man's voice dropped. Only once, that night. There it was, not a bombshell, a whisper, and yet somehow it landed harder. The room froze again. Thank you, Mr. Warren. No further questions. As he stepped down, something changed in the jury. You could see it. Their pens were slower, their stares longer. They weren't evaluating a defense strategy anymore. They were feeling the story settle inside them. The prosecution didn't hesitate. Redirect to Ms. Hargrove. She returned to the stand, calmer now, but visibly different. Like someone who had stepped across a line and knew there was no way back. The prosecutor was softer this time. Earlier, you mentioned Mr. Diddy made a call after Mr. Kelly left, saying to lock everything down. Was that the first time you'd heard such an order? She shook her head. No, I heard it at other events too. How many? At least 4, over 2 years. Same pattern each time? Yes, guests would arrive, lights would dim, staff would be limited, rooms closed off, orders given quietly, lockdown, silence. Was Mr. Kelly present at any of the others? Not that I saw, but the people were similar, big names, executives, artists, always the same rhythm. The courtroom was no longer a space for arguments. It had become a story chamber, the walls absorbing the repetition, the patterns, the whispered rituals. You mentioned your friend texted you that night, saying, "It's happening again." What did she mean by that? A long pause. Then, we had worked another party together years ago, different client, different house, but something happened. A girl was taken upstairs, drugged, we think. No one ever talked about it, but she quit the next day. A man in the gallery exhaled too loudly and drew a warning look from the bailiff. The prosecutor didn't even blink. Thank you, Ms. Hargrove. You may step down. She left the stand, eyes downward, but her silence was louder than words. The next move came like a trapdoor opening. The prosecutor held up a piece of paper. Your Honor, we'd like to submit into evidence a redacted operations log from the Diddy estate, dated June 13th, 2016. The judge reviewed it, nodded, admitted. The screen lit again. A blurry scan appeared. Security protocols, time-stamped entries. Near the bottom, 11:42 p.m. Level 3, lockdown initiated. Guest RK confirmed on premises. Executive clearance granted. No audio-video surveillance active. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled collectively, like the air had been punched out. The jury leaned in. That was the first time it was official. Not just memory, not just hearsay. A written log. RK confirmed. No cameras, no audio. Deliberate silence. Clinical precision. The prosecutor didn't speak. He didn't have to. The evidence did the talking. Behind the defense bench, Diddy sat still. But the hand that had once drummed the table now gripped its edge. The calm mask was slipping. Slowly, reluctantly, fatally. The room didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a cracked vault, slowly letting out years of rot and silence. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked toward the jury. "Let us recess until closing arguments tomorrow morning." He didn't need to slam the gavel. No sound could carry more weight than what had already been said. As people slowly stood, no one spoke. The reporters weren't racing to their laptops, they were just sitting. The spectators weren't rushing for exits, they were thinking. The jury didn't even make eye contact with the attorneys. They looked haunted. Because the truth wasn't just revealed. It had been shouted in silence, carved into the air by every pause, every redacted name, every time someone said, "I didn't speak before, but I am now." Diddy didn't rise when the judge left the bench. He remained seated, alone in a room filled with people, alone in a world that had watched his empire unravel not through headlines or outrage, but through quiet, undeniable testimony, through voices that once shook in fear but now stood strong in daylight. The cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom. But the image that would haunt everyone, jury, judge, journalist, was crystal clear. Diddy still, staring straight ahead, surrounded by silence, but for the first time, unable to silence what came next. The room held its breath as Jane Doe adjusted the microphone. She didn't have the polish of the previous witnesses, didn't have the calculated rhythm of a practiced testimony. But her words were sharp because they were real. Raw. She was 19, she repeated, and it was her first time at an event like that. "At first," she said, "it felt like any other party. Music, lights, people in outfits I couldn't afford even to dream about. But after 11 p.m., things started changing. People stopped making eye contact. Conversations died the moment I walked by, and I noticed something I can't forget. Doors were being closed quietly, lights were being dimmed, and security guys in suits who had been casually leaning against walls suddenly stood in tight formation near the staircases. I got separated from my friend around that time. I asked someone for help, a guy with an earpiece. He just said, 'Stay here. Someone will come get you.' A few minutes later, another man, different suit, walked over and told me that Mr. Diddy wanted to welcome all the guests personally. He said I'd been selected. He smiled when he said it. I didn't know what that meant, but I was young and I didn't want to seem rude or ungrateful, so I followed him upstairs." The room was silent except for her voice, which never cracked. If anything, it grew stronger with every sentence. "At the top of the stairs, I was asked to hand over my phone. They said it was house policy, no cameras, no recordings. I gave it to them. I didn't feel like I had a choice. The hallway was dim, quiet, too quiet. I could hear voices behind one of the closed doors. One of them was Diddy. I'd heard his voice in interviews, videos. The other was deeper, raspier. I recognized it immediately. R. Kelly. It was unmistakable. The judge didn't interrupt. The stenographer typed slower now, almost reverently. I was told to wait in a side room. There was nothing in it. Just a couch, no windows. I waited for maybe 20 minutes. Then I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I knocked and someone told me, "Be patient." I sat back down. Eventually the door opened and I was told the host was busy. I never met him that night, but before I left I went to the restroom. That's when I saw her. Jane's hands clenched on the edge of the witness stand. Another girl, maybe 16, 17. She was crying in the mirror. I asked her if she was okay. She said she didn't know where her phone was. She'd been locked in a bedroom earlier and didn't know whose house she was even in. She didn't even know who brought her. We heard footsteps and she told me, "Don't say anything. They'll make it worse." A woman in the gallery quietly wept. The prosecutor leaned forward slightly. "Why are you coming forward now?" Jane looked straight ahead, not at Diddy, not at the jury, at nothing, or maybe at everything. Because I saw Gene Deal's name in the news, and I knew that if someone that close to him was finally ready to talk, then maybe it was okay for the rest of us. Because for years I told myself it was just my imagination, that maybe I exaggerated. But the more I heard during this trial, the more I realized I didn't imagine anything. I lived it. And I'm tired of pretending I didn't. I'm tired of being afraid. When someone with power and money makes you feel invisible, you start believing that you are. But not anymore. Not today. The silence in the courtroom wasn't empty. It was filled with electricity, with fury, with mourning. The judge didn't look up. The defense didn't speak. Even Diddy sat like a statue, eyes forward, lips drawn tight, not defiant, not broken, hollow. The prosecution stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would now like to submit a final piece of evidence." The judge gave a slow nod. "Proceed." The screen lit one last time. A document. Redacted in parts, but the header was clear. Internal Event Operations Log, Diddy Estate, June 13th, 2016. There, time-stamped at 11:42 p.m., was the entry that no one had been prepared for. Level 3, lockdown initiated. Guest RK confirmed. No surveillance. Executive override active. Location, 3rd floor, Suite 1. Duration, confidential. But beneath that, another note. Short, stark. Escort scheduled for guest JD. Arrival, 11:17 p.m. Departure, 12:07 a.m. No incident reported. File closed. The prosecutor said nothing. He just turned to the jury, nodded once, and sat down. There was nothing more to say. The rest was already living in the expressions of every person in that room. The judge looked toward the defense, who remained seated, silent. Then he turned to the jury. "We will recess until closing arguments tomorrow morning." He didn't need to slam the gavel. No sound could carry more weight than what had already been said. As people slowly stood, no one spoke. The reporters weren't racing to their laptops, they were just sitting. The spectators weren't rushing for exits, they were thinking. The jury didn't even make eye contact with the attorneys. They looked haunted. Because the truth wasn't just revealed. It had been shouted in silence. Carved into the air by every pause, every redacted name, every time someone said, "I didn't speak before," but I am now. Diddy didn't rise when the judge left the bench. He remained seated, alone in a room filled with people, alone in a world that had watched his empire unravel not through headlines or outrage, but through quiet, undeniable testimony, through voices that once shook in fear but now stood strong in daylight. The cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, but the image that would haunt everyone, jury, judge, journalist, was crystal clear. Diddy still, staring straight ahead, surrounded by silence, but for the first time, unable to silence what came next. The courtroom had become sacred. Not because of reverence, but because of the haunting stillness that followed testimony too devastating to argue with. When the judge returned to the bench the next morning, his presence didn't command silence, it merely acknowledged the one that had never left. The gallery was full, but no one whispered. Reporters sat like monks. Jurors had the heavy look of people who had seen something they couldn't unsee. And at the defense table, Diddy sat in the same posture as the day before. But something in him had changed. Not broken, not melted, just emptied. As if every carefully crafted layer of charisma and power had been peeled off in front of the nation. The prosecution stood again, but this time with less force. Not because they were weak, because they didn't need volume. They had gravity. Your Honor, we request to submit the sealed transcript from a cooperating witness. For the record, this is a former estate employee assigned to the third-floor suite on June 13, 2060. The judge nodded. The clerk began to read. I was responsible for managing the suite. I was instructed to remove all surveillance devices, disable hallway feeds, and prepare the room for 2 guests, Sean Diddy and R. Kelly. Once the suite was prepared, I was dismissed from the floor. The hallway cameras were not restored until 3:20 a.m. The next morning, I returned to reset the area. Outside the door, I found a pill bottle. It had no label. It was empty. The transcript was cold, emotionless. It didn't need to cry to disturb the soul. The prosecutor stepped forward again. We also submit phone records from a burner device recovered in an unrelated investigation, dated June 14th. The log confirms a single call, 17 seconds, to a contact labeled K. He didn't have to say the name. The courtroom filled in the blank, R. Kelly. No one even raised an objection. Because what would be the point? The evidence wasn't just a log, it was a breadcrumb. And every witness, every text, every hushed command had been a breadcrumb to leading not just to a night, but to a network. Then something unprecedented happened. A juror raised his hand. Has Mr. Kelly denied attending the event? The judge allowed the question. The prosecutor answered calmly. To our knowledge, no public denial, no comment, and no statement has ever been issued from Mr. Kelly or his legal team regarding June 13th. Silence again, the kind that vibrated beneath the skin. The prosecutor turned back to the stand. Your Honor, we now call our final witness, Jane Doe. The room tensed. Not because of the name, but because everyone knew who this Jane Doe was. Not the 19-year-old from before. Someone else, someone new, someone deeper. A woman stepped forward from the back room, face concealed, voice shaking only slightly. I worked for Diddy for 5 years. I coordinated guest logistics, travel, entries, exit schedules. I saw names, I heard plans, and I stayed silent for a long time. But after what I've seen in this courtroom, I can't anymore. She paused. The June 13th event was not unique. It was patterned. I was given code names. VIPs had colors instead of names. Security was told to forget faces. There were no permanent staff on the third floor, just rotating assistants, so no one would connect too much. The defense team shifted uncomfortably. One finally stood to object, but the judge raised his hand. "Let her finish." The witness continued. "I don't know what happened inside those rooms. I wasn't allowed up there. But I know what I was told to prepare. I know the lengths taken to erase trails, phones collected, sign-in sheets destroyed, guests arriving in separate cars with blackout windows. I know who told me to do it. Diddy. She looked toward the defense table. Diddy didn't look back. He gave the orders through intermediaries, but we all knew whose voice it was. You didn't question it. Not if you wanted to keep your job, not if you wanted to stay safe." She took a long breath. "I'm not a hero. I stayed quiet too long. But if you're asking whether what's been said in this courtroom sounds real, it doesn't just sound real, it sounds familiar." The judge said nothing. The jury didn't blink. The prosecutor gave a slight nod. "No further questions." The judge turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have now heard all testimony and reviewed all admitted evidence. We will break until deliberation begins." But no one moved. The reporters didn't reach for their phones. The jurors didn't shift in their chairs. The defense didn't stand. Because this trial wasn't about waiting for the verdict anymore. The verdict had already arrived in the court of conscience. Diddy sat still. No reaction. No flicker of strategy. Just silence. Not the kind he once used to intimidate, but the kind that falls when there's nothing left to deny. The court was adjourned, but no one left, changed back into who they were before they walked in. The prosecutors had not just built a case, they had cracked open a world, a machine built on celebrity, secrecy, and silence. And the public had seen the gears turning. The headlines would explode, the internet would light up. But the real shift had already happened in the hearts of those who had heard voices that once trembled and now rang clear. The final image was not a judge slamming a gavel. It was Diddy, alone at the defense table, no longer a man on trial, but a symbol of what power does when no one dares to say no. And now, finally, someone had.